I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land. We pay respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to other Indigenous people who may be present. As well, I would like to acknowledge the presence of the President of the Queensland-Afghan Association, Dr. Rashid Mahmood, who's present with members of his family. And the objective here is to spread it out more into the civil society. And in this case, we have, if you like, a pilot where we are looking at development, communication, and culture. So that's where we're heading this afternoon. We've got a distinguished panel and everybody will be introduced shortly. But to start, I would like to invite His Excellency Wahidullah Waissi, who will commence the proceedings for us.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the launch of the Afghanistan-Australian dialogue, which will open the gate for people-to-people contact, hopefully in future. So we started the launch from Brisbane, and we have greater opportunities to arrange our discussion in 2018. Before I go through the purpose of this dialogue, I would like to acknowledge the support which was extended to us in a very short time from Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, from Afghan Community Association in Queensland, and from Australian Institute of International Affairs and Australian Council of Europe, who put their hands together to make this possible, and now we are here to launch our first dialogue. And also I would like to acknowledge the participation of Afghan young leaders here in Australia, which they started their tour from Brisbane, and they will ended up through Sydney and Canberra to Melbourne. Mr. Omid Sharifi, President of the Art Lords, Mr. Asad Zamir, former Minister of Agriculture, and Mr. Lutfullah Najafizadeh, Head of Tulu News TV channel. So please put your hands and welcoming them to this big event. The biggest aim of the Australia-Afghanistan dialogue is to develop a new paradigm of relationship. You might have known that the Australian-Afghanistan relationship goes beyond 150 years. The time which the Cameleers came to this land and contributed their support to the transportation and communication system. That was really opening the gate for Afghans to come to Australia, and their dissidents continued that path, and they have their families in both countries. In 1969, we started the first political relationship through non-resident ambassadors, which marks the first time of political relationship between two countries. The next level of contact established when the 9/11 happened in United States, and Australia, as a non-NATO member, contributed their military and security support to United States and joined the coalition in Afghanistan in battle for extremism and terrorism, which marks the biggest direct support and contact to Afghanistan and to its people. The last milestone is this year, April 2017, when the first president officially visited Australia. and opened up the gate for broader cooperation beside military and security relationship. And that really opened the possibilities for connection through culture, through other means of communication, agriculture, mining, water management, and many other forms of non-military, non-security assistance, which now we are working to start the implementation. I should also say that, based on the recent census that we have received, and based on some very good contribution from the Afghan Society Association, the total number of Afghans living in Australia is beyond 60,000. So that is the biggest community which we can really mark the beginning of a greater cooperation between these two countries. It turns to its maturity that we can put more efforts to make this possible, and the people-to-people contact would make it more clearer for the Australians who have their sons and daughters served in Afghanistan. The number goes beyond 25,000 people in uniform. And the Australians lost 42 soldiers inside Afghanistan. So this is the biggest reason why the people-to-people contact is necessary, and the societies and communities can get engaged to each other. This dialogue will act at a platform, as a platform to expand, acknowledge, and share our common values to each other. So this will be the good beginning, and I'm really looking forward for more and greater contribution from you for the next events that we might have in 2018. Again, I'm really happy that I was really making this while I'm working as an ambassador in Afghanistan and Australia, and this would be one of our biggest memory for our people and also for the communities that we have in Afghanistan and Australia. Thank you so much.
Just to extend the welcome a little further from the City of Brisbane, Councillor Krista Adams is the Chairperson for Finance and Economic Development and International Affairs with the Brisbane City Council, as well as being the Councillor for Holland Park, and I'm going to ask her to address you as well.
Thank you, Dr. Duffield. It's lovely to be here this afternoon. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners and the land on which we meet here this afternoon, those with us and those past. Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Our many distinguished guests, our Consular Corps, Chamber of Commerce and our multicultural community, thank you for joining us here in our beloved Brisbane Square Library. You've come on a very busy time in Brisbane over this day. We've got the Ashes playing at the Gabba, we've got Rugby League tonight, we had the Asia Pacific Screen Awards last night. It's like all happening in Brisbane right now, and of course we've got the Australia-Afghanistan dialogue, which is a very exciting event for today as well. It's my pleasure to be here on behalf of Lord Mayor Graham Quirk. As Dr. Duffield mentioned, I am Finance and Economic Development, but I'm also the Councillor assisting the Lord Mayor in International Relations, and I have a fantastic opportunity to touch base with so many of our multicultural communities within Brisbane, and just like you're doing here today, make sure we keep the lines of dialogue open to learn about how we can better learn from each other and live together, cross-cultural relationships in all those areas. As His Excellency mentioned, 150 plus years of relationships with Afghanistan and Australia, starting with the Cameleers, and interesting, our largest source of permanent migrants, nearly 70,000 from Afghanistan, which is something you probably don't think about every day. We are a community of cultures from all over the world here in Brisbane, and we actually pride ourselves on having that multicultural background here as well. The strength of our city is not in our size, so we're not as big as Melbourne and we're not as big as Sydney, but they're so 50 years ago. It's all about happening in Brisbane now. Our strength is actually in our multiculturalism. We have 208 different countries represented in Brisbane. We have a total of 211 different languages at home, and we have over 110 diverse world religions. So we know that about 28% of Brisbane residents were born overseas. That is a large part of our population here that are sharing their wonderful cultures, everything from their food, their music, and their politics to become the melting pot that is Brisbane City. And of course, we do that with total harmony and diversity and unification here in Brisbane as well. One of the things that I'm involved in my role here in Council, and one of our driving forces in championing these cross-cultural collaborations, is our Lord Mayor's Multicultural Roundtable, and that's been established since 2005. And we have initiatives on that roundtable like our Business Scholarship and Mentoring Scheme that I encourage you, if you're interested in getting involved, you know, any young entrepreneurs or business people getting started in Brisbane, they don't need to be that young either, that want that support on setting up in Brisbane and that economic support. We've got the program now in its third year for the mentoring, and we've had nearly 300 recipients of that scholarship and mentoring program. So please, if you know anybody that would like to be involved in that, reach out to me or to Brisbane City Council. Because as I said, one of our things we're very proud of here is our friendliness and our generosity to those who come to our shores to share in this beautiful lifestyle here. The dialogue that you'll have here today will act as a platform for expanding that relationship, which is really exciting. And those new levels of cooperations in areas that are of relevance to both of our countries. And these type of dialogues are really important for us, not just in Brisbane but across Australia, to identify all of those future cooperations that are possible as well, whether it's at an intergovernment level or it's just about people-to-people awareness and understanding with our citizens here in Australia as well. It is actually starting to warm up here in Brisbane, so summer is starting to arrive. So I hope while you're here, if you're from interstate or out of the city, that you take the opportunity to see the wonderful Brisbane, our new world city. It is Christmas. There's a lot of things happening on top of all those sporting events as well. I really hope you enjoy your stay. You get a lot out of the dialogue here, and I'm very, very proud to be hosting this in Brisbane City Council, and best of luck for the dialogue. Thank you.
For the actual forum part of the program, we have a provision for the panel of speakers to speak, and then there'll be a Q&A section. So I've asked them to come to the lectern one by one, be introduced and speak. Now, how to do that? They have defined what the forum is about through who they are, because these are go-to people if you're talking about development, if you're talking about communication, and if you're talking about culture. I thought we might start at the business end with the agriculture and the development, and then move through to the culture and communication. Now, that means that we want to start by hearing from Mr. Wahidullah Zamir, whose credentials include expertise in rural development, education, agriculture and natural resources management. Very good fit to come to Queensland to talk about development and cooperation. He's a former Minister of Agriculture, Irrigation and Livestock for Afghanistan from 2015 until September, through to September 2017. So I will now invite you to tell us about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if I may reflect on some of my engagement with different sectors, showing how the Afghan economy function or not function. To start with, let me talk about what I was recently engaged with, is the agriculture. Around 70% of Afghan population are engaged in agriculture. It is the backbone of our economy. And we used to have over 65% of our GDP in the 70s that was coming from agriculture. But now it's around close to 30%. The official figure is 26%, but that does not include some of the other sectors. That tells us something, that why it's so important for Afghan people to invest in the agriculture. Without agriculture, there will be no long-term stability in this country. So that's very critical. The other area which is very important, I will come back to the detail of that one. The other area that's critical, or another pillar for the Afghan economy, is the natural resources, the untapped minerals and oil and gas that we have in Afghanistan. The natural resource sector has not been developed or has poorly developed. We need to work on many fronts in the sector. And we need to improve the capacity as well as the regulatory framework in the country. And just to highlight another important sector for our economy that's becoming prominent these days is the trade in transit. With the recently launching signing the agreement of the Lapis Lazuli route, which His Excellency Mr. Waissi was one of the champions working on this project, connecting Afghanistan all the way to Georgia to Europe. So these are the strengths that we need to focus. We need to invest in the country. We had the international security forces in Afghanistan supporting the people as well as the cause that was out there. But as the security forces pull out of the country, we had faced serious economic issue. Unemployment, people were facing economic challenges. The business were it was a bubble economy, not an actual economy that was people living in the past decade or so. The economic growth, the GDP growth in 2014 was below, it wasn't minus 1.3% or more or less. So what the priority of the people, the government, was that we need to invest in the real pillars where we need to create sustainable economy. That's most important for us. As the vision for the Afghanistan National Development Framework that was presented recently, or last year, was that how to transform the country from becoming a country that rely on import and become an export nation. And we do have the strength. Our strengths are agriculture, natural resources. So for us, it's important what area to invest that our people need to see quick result. And the quick result does not come from the natural resources. It comes from the mining sector as well as from the trade, from the agriculture sector as well as from the trade. So as the investment happening, improving our irrigation network, helping the farmers with different seeds and horticulture, where our strengths are in terms of export, we see some development or growth in our GDP. 2017, the GDP growth was 1.1% from minus. And this is we're talking about, while we need an average GDP of more than 4% to sustain the population growth that we have. Then in 2016, we had GDP growth of 2.4%. And according to the World Bank report, it says that the growth was mainly due to the growth in agriculture sector. So that's the sector that creates the employment and contribute to the economy. So this year we are hopeful, the Afghan population is hopeful that the GDP growth would be above 3%. So we are moving, but the pace of that growth is minimum. What needs to be done? There's I don't know how long I have, but I would cut short. I can go on for it. But just to highlight some of the important aspects of the cooperation, Afghan-Australian people, the dialogue that we're just talking. There has been some recent engagement. There has been partnership with the DFAT, with the Australian government and Afghan government on various fronts. But the dry land is one area that has been some collaboration are happening, and we definitely can learn from the experience out here. Thank you very much. Good talking to everyone.
As a very fitting rejoinder, Pete Lewis is the Vice President of the Australian Agricultural Journalists Association. Now, agricultural journalists in Australia immerse themselves in agricultural business of all kinds, from the science through to the selling. And as Peter says, his work involves him in knowing how the bush ticks, understanding how it works. So I'm going to ask him now to share some of his knowledge of that as it will relate to this development mission with Afghanistan. Peter Lewis.
Thank you very much, Lee. It's terrific to be here today. Krista Adams mentioned that the Test cricket is obviously one of the significant things. And for those of you who have an interest in the outcome of this match, I can tell you that the score at T is 3 for 76. That's Australia, in reply to England's 302 first innings score. So it's delicately poised. Now, Excellency, I also want to congratulate Afghanistan. The game of cricket, of course, is rising in popularity in your country. And you have just this year been admitted to the panel of international test nations. And sometime soon we could be hosting Afghanistan here at the Gabba. And nothing would give me more pleasure than to see that. And good luck with your upcoming one-day internationals against Ireland. So there. As Lee said, I am currently the Vice President of the Australian Council of Agricultural Journalists. That's an organisation, an umbrella organisation that represents journalists and producers and writers and broadcasters involved in, we think, the great story about Australian agriculture, the people who make the things you eat and you wear, but increasingly, of course, the people who produce things that we export. And one of the great agricultural success stories in this country over the last 50 years has been our export of agricultural expertise, particularly dryland farming expertise, which is entirely appropriate from the driest continent on Earth. A lot of these projects are direct government to government, as our previous speakers have mentioned, but there are some incredibly creative projects done at the level of universities and colleges and even private entrepreneurs and individual farmers. And one of the more interesting ones that I've been involved in recent times during some work is with the Queensland Alliance for Agriculture and Food Innovation, QAFI, which is based at the St Lucia campus, Excellency, of the University of Queensland. It is a collaboration, as the name would suggest, of a lot of like-minded souls, particularly from UQ and the CSIRO. And I wasn't aware until quite recently, but the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have been long-time collaborators with QAFI on a range of projects, in particular a very interesting project currently to develop drought-resistant sorghum varieties to be applied in sub-Saharan Africa. And if nothing else, if one of the things that comes out of today is a direct line of communication that I can give you and your staff, they should contact these people. There are a lot of very bright sparks at QAFI, and they are constantly scanning the horizon and the international scene to look at very worthy co-collaborators. They have the know-how, they have a great sense of lessons learned in this country that can be applied in some of the food insecure parts of the world, and they have been particularly successful at it. And the fact that the world's richest man and his wife have encouraged over now a considerably lengthy period the work that's done right here in Queensland, I think is a real feather in their cap. One of the events that Councillor Adams overlooked was the fact that this week was also featured for the very first time National Agriculture Day in Australia. I just don't know how we got to the early part of the 21st century without acknowledging the role of agriculture, but we have done it this time, and we think that's a really important thing to do. As much as anything, I'm interested now to speak with your colleagues, and I'm delighted to see that there are other journalists and communicators on the panel. I think it's a really important part of the whole food story, that people understand a lot more about what they eat, how it's produced, and in this context, how we can help other people provide food security for their population. So I'm delighted to be here. I look forward to answering questions and asking a few. So for the time being, thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, the journalists have been mentioned, and communication is important. And so I'm going to call on Mr. Lutfullah Najafizada, who is himself a very senior journalist who is director of Tolo News, Afghanistan's top 24/7 news channel. Now, enough said. That's a very strategic position to be in, and to be an informant for us on the topics that we have before us at the moment. Please tell us.
Good afternoon. I asked a fellow passenger on the flight yesterday that what should I expect when I'm in Brisbane? And then she said, when you wake up tomorrow morning, you're going to love the city. And I asked for details, and she said, I'm not going to tell you details, so you're going to find out yourself. And the walk we had this morning and the breakfast, sort of lunch breakfast we had, I have to say it's a beautiful city. I'm very delighted to be here. And thank you for hosting us, Ambassador. Thank you for arranging it, and thank you for all of you to be here today. As you can see, we have no prepared speeches, so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Afghanistan of today. The country has changed quite significantly in the past 15, 16 years. And it's important to highlight some of the important facts. One, the country's population, 2/3 of the 30 million, is under 25. That means the younger generation of Afghans barely remember the Taliban, which was just 17 years ago, let alone what happened before the Taliban. Our country in the past 50 years have seen so many revolutions that probably a lot of nations can't witness in many, many centuries. We have seen in 1 or 2 generations, from communism, from monarchy to communism, to civil war, to anarchy, to no government, to Taliban, and now to democracy. So a lot of people would question whether democracy is sustainable, which is a very valid question. But as an Afghan born and grown up in Afghanistan, and I've seen the changes in the past 15 years, I am very hopeful. One fact is that today we have about 8 million kids in school. 40% of them girls. That is phenomenal. In 2004, when I voted for the first time, my uncle told me who to vote. In 2014, when my sister voted for the first time, she refused to listen to the family. She said she's going to vote on based on her own judgment. When I was a kid, in my family, it was my granddad who was telling us what was in the news, how to be informed, what is happening, and how should our family react. Today, when my 18, 20-year-old sister coming home, she gets asked by my father, what is out there? What is happening? The cycle, it's not just that the information flow is coming from a younger perspective. It demonstrates an empowered nation. It demonstrates the fact that the country has evolved, and that is quite significant, and that's irreversible. In the past 15 years, life expectancy has gone up by more than 10 years. In the past 15 years, Afghanistan's access to healthcare has tripled. In the past 15 years, there are 70 TV channels. I run one of them. 15 years ago, the Taliban even shut down the state TV. And even before the Taliban, you could not even gossip at home to say what is happening, to talk about politics. But today, the country is so vibrant, civil society is so vibrant, and it's a space where you can freely think and freely express your thoughts. For a very historic country, an old country, and also a very young population, I think that is a tremendous development for Afghanistan, and that makes me very hopeful. Let's not forget that we've had 5 elections in the past 15 years. First democratic transfer of power in our history. We mock our leader for saying that we have 5,000 years of history. If we have 5,000 years of history, 2014, with all the challenges, was the first democratic transfer of power in Afghanistan. So why I'm hopeful every morning I wake up and I go to work? A couple of reasons. One, I think the younger Afghans would never take RPGs in the interests of particular individuals to go and destroy their own lands. Because when we moved back to Kabul in 2003 from Mazar, we found our house totally destroyed. I don't think we can afford to do that again. The country, as the minister said, an ambassador, has tremendous challenges as well today. It's not a perfect world. 1/3 of our population is still living under the poverty line, meaning they earn less than $2 a day. We're still one of the poorest nations on the face of earth. We're still struggling to make sure that the gains we've made in the past 15, 17 years are sustainable and we can consolidate on them. But thanks to the generous international community's support, Australians included, it has changed not just the capital, not just the urban centers, but also in remote places like Ghan, where your troops served. And a lot has happened. The country today is facing some uncertainties. We expect major electoral reforms in order to ensure that the challenges we had in the 2014 elections are not repeated. The country today is facing some serious economic challenges. The country today is facing issues to an extent threatening our national unity. But some of these challenges are very common in any part of the world if you go deep domestically into what's happening in their domestic affairs. But overall, I'm here today to thank you for what you've done as a country and being part of the global campaign to make lives better, to make mothers more hopeful, and make their sons and daughters more ambitious for the future. And you have certainly made a difference. And if you would accept, at least 3 of us coming from Kabul yesterday are representing that generation. Thank you.
Well, you can see the potential for going far with good communication. And to learn something more in the field of 21st century communication from that young country, Afghanistan, or should I say country of young people, wait to hear from Mr. Sharifi. But first, who knows about intercultural communication, which is what we're going to be depending on here. So Professor Max Brandl is probably from birth experienced in intercultural communication, coming from Switzerland, where they have several languages, official and otherwise. That's only the beginning. He was for a long time Professor of Languages at the University of Queensland, and on his favourite themes, history of communication among peoples, I'm sure he'll have something interesting for us now.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, may I perhaps respond to one of the speakers who preceded me with regard to success in education in Afghanistan. I'm very happy to report that the European press in French, German, English, and Italian has on many occasions reported very positively on the wonderful results you're producing, particularly as women have also now been able to embrace the wonderful feature of growing up with education. A previous speaker has already mentioned multiculturalism. In Australian history, we have never defined what multiculturalism is, but we all embrace the same notion. Multiculturalism is about mutual respect between individuals and mutual respect between different countries. And in the Australian context, we have also been very strong on delivering services for the 28% which were already mentioned, and for the retention of our cultural habits and our languages. And our great strength of building multiculturalism is in the Australian primary schools. And I can't think any other country in the world teaches multiculturalism better than we do in Australia. I'm very proud of that. In 1980, how many Afghans were there in Queensland? Less than that, 8. In 95, there were 257, and today there are 5,000, because we're also including in Australia the second generation, which is a large number. I had the privilege of knowing Dr. Rasta, who was a very eminent medical doctor, who was a former Colombo Plan student. I used to know Colombo Plan students in the 60s. They had a lot of difficulties because Afghanistan is a very proud country with a great history, but the invaders were never successful, whereas other countries in Asia were taken over, but they had one benefit. The Indians were given 3 great universities. Singapore, Malaysia, and other countries were given English from the 19th century. So actually, the proud nations are today slightly disadvantaged still. Now, Dr. Raska was the first community leader, and he was succeeded by a gentleman who's here today, Dr. Khalidi, who, like Dr. Rasta, wrote an article on the Afghans in Queensland, which I published firstly in the centenary publication of the Department of Publication, or of the Department of the Premier and Cabinet, and more recently in 2015, in the book with 470 pages, we featured 144 ethnic communities. And this time, the written Afghans was written by Dr. Khalidi, who is here with us. Welcome. Dr. Khalidi is a friend of mine, and he's our contact person. In our organisation, like the Ethnic Communities Council and the Australian Council for Europe, we know community leaders from every community in Queensland. And Dr. Khalidi is an expert at statistical, demographic and health status data, and he's also an Australian-based poet in one of the two national languages of Afghanistan, namely Indari. He's also a former advisor to Australia's Prime Minister. In all our endeavour of interaction between Australia and Afghanistan, it is important that we link up with the leaders of the communities, because the leaders play such an important role. Because in future you will also do what many other countries do in Asia. In the Philippines, we have a community of 10 million living abroad, and their remittances from their jobs in the Middle East and elsewhere in the world are a significant part of the national economy of the Philippines. And this applies now to a large number of countries throughout the world. That also in the USA, a lot of South American countries benefit greatly from the South Americans who have settled in North America and maintained their families at home. The world is one big organization where we all have to interlink and help each other. Because we all know that in every country there are rich areas and there are poor areas. And we also know the wealth in the world is generated everywhere in one place, in the big city. And the country is always somewhat disadvantaged. And your country, Afghanistan, is still 3/4 country, still agricultural largely. So these are some of the reasons underlying the current position around the world. Coming back to multiculturalism, there's one thing I forgot deliberately, because our record isn't all that good. I came here at the age of 24, I'm not guilty, but until 1973, we were an extremely racist society with racist policies, and they were instituted by the first parliament in 1901. The Australians at the time were far better at defining racism than they were defining today multiculturalism. It's probably a bit easier to define. But multiculturalism is for everybody. But today, of course, we are not only multicultural, we're also multi-race a country. We're all fitting together, and you notice that in the last 10 years, a large number of people have come here from Asia. Now in Queensland, we do things differently. The other states, Sydney and New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, they all have ethnic affairs commissions, bureaucracies. We don't like bureaucracy up here because we're running ethnic affairs through networks, including managers and helpers who work for free. The Ethnic Communities Council of Queensland, and the CEO is here today, Mr. Page, has 300 paid people working full-time or part-time. And the Ethnic Communities Council has a lot of volunteers, including myself. And we operate throughout the state. We even have a home for aged ethnic people, which is unique in Australia. It's wonderful in this state because last year we were offered $10 million to provide more beds for ethnic people. We didn't even ask for them. We do things differently here. Admittedly, we are somewhat fortunate because our communities are different. Here we have the people from the South Pacific, from South Africa, and from New Zealand and a few other places. The populations are different elsewhere, and we have no great concentrations. Now, the State Government Department, MAQ, Multicultural Affairs Queensland, does something marvellous. Every year they publish a directory featuring all migrant organisations in Queensland, including the organisations pertaining to people from Afghanistan. This directory also features business connections. This life is about connections. And it is also concerned with links with the chambers of commerce working internationally, and that's something we may have in future. An Afghan Chamber of Commerce in Australia for bilateral contact, because Afghanistan needs investments. Afghanistan needs help from other countries, but above all, Afghanistan needs peace. Peace is important because all the rich countries in the world need to have peace and have peace. That's just how things operate. Now, the Australian Council for Europe, working closely with the Ethnic Communities Council, thrives on connecting also in the cultural area, and we have direct access to the senior politicians, including the Premier. The Premier talks to us, and we talk to the Premier, and we talk to all the people in Queensland who have leadership and who can help with the promotion of multiculturalism. Now, one interesting thing we have pioneered in Australia is the provision of community interpreters, translators. That's my own profession. And of course, we also provide now services in languages for the people from Afghanistan. In Australia, people have a right to get such services. And we also have many other services like multicultural television and multilingual radio. This is just part of our society now. It's a great achievement. Unfortunately, my predecessors have mentioned a fair few of the things I was going to talk about, but yeah. And I want to finish up with talking about refugees. In Australia, we still should differentiate between refugees and migrants, because we are one of the few countries with a Minister of Immigration. We are a country that needs more people for economies of scale and for its future, because we are willing to supply the world in future with some of the things they may be short of in other countries. The refugees are a relatively recent phenomenon, and the first refugee congress attended by Australia was in 1938 at Evian in France, and Australia decided to take 15,000 refugees from Nazism. We have now huge numbers of refugees. It's an extraordinary problem, and we are certainly, for a country with a small population, pioneers in the adoption of refugees from around the world. And the refugees who've come to Australia have been great achievers, and some of the refugee families who came here to Australia are now amongst the 10 richest families in Australia. These refugees are usually people, certainly the European refugees, with education and a drive to achieve something for the new countries and for themselves. I'm indeed proud as a multiculturalist that we have a superb refugee history in this country. Afghanistan has a lot to offer. A beautiful country and vast natural resources which have largely not been explored. Afghanistan will also be a tourist destination when there is peace in your country. And tourism is a very valuable industry. But we also need to learn in Australia. Our laws and ways of interacting with Afghanistan must be compatible with Islam. We need to learn to interact with more successfully with the 5% or so of Australia's Islamic population. That is an ingredient of successful multiculturalism. Of course, the first Muslims to come to Australia came early in the 19th century. They were the Cameleers. We're making progress in our social development in this country, and part of our existence as a country is to be compassionate also with other countries, to extend friendship to all the countries, not only to the rich ones, and that's a problem in our time. You only read mainly about the rich countries, not about those who need business, trade, investment, and so forth. We want to see your country, which is also multicultural, to achieve unity. And dear gentlemen from Afghanistan, I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of all of us, we wish you personally and your country a great future.
Thank you, Max. Multicultural and multidimensional, many aspects covered. Max was talking about communication and with it linkage. Thinking of one poor country, our neighbours Papua New Guinea, in the remotest village, where contact with the outside world might have been perhaps as early as the 1940s. People now, village people, can communicate and do business routinely with people in New York, Shanghai, Rio de Janeiro, or the City of London. And I noticed that our next speaker, Mr. Ahmed Sharifi, has an award for Best Animation for Peace and Tolerance under UNDP auspices, and he is co-founder and president of Art Lords. And so much of communication, I think, is in that kind of field. So I'm looking forward to, as you are, to hearing what he has to tell us about that.
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon. So it's a tough act to follow after very good statements, and especially when I left Kabul it was 22nd November and now it's 24th, so no prepared statements. It's a bit tough. I have a small organization called Art Lords. So Art Lords is the opposite of the warlords, the drug lords, the corrupt lords. We call ourselves the positive lords, the constructive lords. And it's just one example among 1,000 examples of what Lutfullah mentioned about the successes. We started this organization to just go out there on the streets of Kabul, recruit volunteers to take responsibility. We just, if you travel to Afghanistan and if you see it in the news, Kabul is completely changed to a prison. There's all these big blast walls, concrete walls, covering everything. If it's your high school, university, embassies, government offices, so they're all completely covered with these blast walls. So what we did, we wanted to bring down these walls. And the only thing you could do was to go and paint them or put a different color on them. Because as I was born, raised, and educated in Kabul, I remember Kabul was very beautiful. And I could ride my bicycle to my high school, go everywhere I wanted, the streets were open, but suddenly everything kept changing, and I felt suffocated because I could no longer enjoy my city, and they were getting our space, the space from citizens. So we just wanted to reclaim back that space and reclaim back these beautiful names, for example, Lore. And we went out there. We started painting these big blast walls. It was very different. It was very difficult at the beginning. But we succeeded in convincing the government that let us do this, because these are all walls which are people guarding them with guns and everything. So it was very difficult to get those permissions. And while we had these permissions to do this kind of work, we wanted to convey some messages, because it's like thousands of kilometers of blast walls, and then it's an open canvas for artists, for us. We wanted to convey our messages. So we started to think about those themes, which are very important social issues for Afghanistan. For example, corruption or fighting corruption, issues of women's rights, issues of transitional justice. So we did our first mural. It's just a pair of eyes, and it says, "I see you." If you're a corrupt person, if you're stealing from Afghanistan, from Afghans, then we see you, and we will take you to justice. If we cannot do it now, maybe later on. So this is sort of at the same time that we wanted to encourage volunteerism and encourage people to take responsibility and then do something for their communities, it was also a message to the powerful and the corrupt and the warlords and the drug lords that people are waking up and they will stand up against you. So that's how it all started. Right now I have a gallery in Kabul. I have 34 artists who are working in different parts of the country. We traveled all the way to the borders of Pakistan, borders of Iran, painting, doing street art, music. We're using all this beautiful art as a tool for social change. First, really change the perceptions of people, change the attitudes.
Just move back a little bit.
Sorry. And also trying to help them do something for their own communities at the same time. All of this really helped us connect with a large, vast community of young volunteers that all over the country. They are trying to come up with ideas, sending us messages, and helping us do these beautiful murals. And whenever we are going to do a street theater or music, they're all joining in. And sort of it's a engagement for the community, because 90% of the country, I think, they do not have any kind of involvement or engagement in what's happening in the country. So somehow when we are painting, we invite everybody to join in, and that becomes the platform where they can have a voice if it's about corruption, if it's about women's rights. And by their involvement, we're trying to really engage, talk about it, and put a seed of doubt in their minds, and encourage them to ask questions, and give them that sort of power or confidence to stand up. Because the first time I started painting on the streets of Kabul, people thought I'm a foreigner because they came in and started speaking in English. And then we started responding in Dari or Pashto. They were like surprised that, look, young Afghans are coming out on the streets and doing this. They thought all these fancy work will be foreigners. And then we were painting a mural against corruption, and they would say, well, look, I'm a teacher, or I'm a street vendor. How can I fight corruption in this country? And the corrupt people are the ministers, or not this minister, but or the members of parliament. And then you will feel that they do not have that confidence to stand up, and they feel powerless. So what we would do is we really talk to them first by engaging them and giving them a brush. So it doesn't matter if you're a street kid working on the streets of Kabul, or you're the president of Afghanistan. All of them have come and painted with us on a canvas. And then at the same time talking to them and giving them this confidence that, yes, your voice counts, and you can stand up, and you can be part of something. So that is, I think, we moved on to schools and universities and sort of helping people to have a critical thinking, because in our educational system, in high schools or madrasas or mosques, they're not teaching us critical thinking. So I think what we do with art, and murals, and music, and street theater, that really encourages critical thinking among young generation of Afghanistan. And this also helped us to show a different face of Afghanistan, because I travel a lot of places, I do murals in different capitals of the world, and before they were asking me about corruption, women's issues, violence, and everything. But right now it's all about art and culture, and I think we are showing a different face of Afghanistan, and that face that you can see all of us young representatives from Afghanistan. And this also helps me connect with Afghan diaspora in Berlin, and maybe here in Brisbane, Sydney, US, to really connect with them and find ways that they can give back to that community. So one of the ways is art, animation, documentation, and sort of connection between and talking. So that really helps. So thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Beautiful city, good weather. There was winter, snow, so it's very quite beautiful to be here.
Oh, thank you. You can see, I see you. Your voice counts. The power of some creative and simple messages can help with this project of extending the dialogue to people, and with it advancing countries.